welcome back to the Evolution of Horror. My name is Mike Muncer, and as ever, I am your host. Now, usually on this podcast, we're exploring the history and the evolution of the horror genre. We are currently in the middle of our 10th season, exploring the evolution of nature biting back in horror, but we have taken a few weeks off in the middle of our current season, and we'll be back next Friday to continue that series. But this week, I'm bringing you another little bonus episode, your third bonus episode of the week, no less, because we are now getting into spooky season, and there are a lot of very fun horror Halloween events coming up around the world, including one of the biggest and best of all, the Universal Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Studios in Orlando. Now, I was very, very lucky to be invited along to the opening press night of this Halloween Horror Night a couple of weeks ago. So I went along, flew to Orlando, stayed there for the weekend. I got to explore the theme park, go on all the rides and attractions, and check out every single one of their Halloween Horror Night mazes, which was absolutely terrifying and so much fun. So what I thought would be nice to do is have a little discussion about that experience, recommend some of the best attractions, best horror mazes that we did that weekend, because I know quite a lot of you are planning on going and have got your tickets, and there are probably too many to get through in one night unless you pay extra for an express pass and all of that kind of thing. So I thought it might be nice to kind of talk about what are some of the best ones to check out and talk about some of our highlights across the weekend. So I sat down with two absolute legends and friends of the pod, 2/3 of RKG, Gav Murphy and Daniel Krupa. The two of them have also just launched a brand new Friday the 13th podcast, which people here I'm sure will be very interested to hear about. But they were there all weekend at Universal Orlando with me. They've been there for the last few years. So I sat down and chatted to them about some of the best and scariest moments of the weekend. Enjoy. Daniel Krupa and Gav Murphy, hello.
Hiya. How's it going?
Hello, really good, thank you. How are you guys? You've had a busy few weeks, right?
We have, yeah. We went to Halloween Horror Nights when we got to see you out there. We launched a brand new horror movie podcast, How to Survive Friday the 13th.
This is incredible. Tell us a little bit about, Daniel, tell us a little bit about this Friday the 13th podcast.
So Gav and I have done kind of movie and entertainment focused podcasts for like 8 years together, and during lockdown we did a very, very exceptionally popular podcast all about Jonathan Creek.
We
chase trends.
You guys have got such a huge fan base and following, but I've got to admit, I literally discovered you guys because of that podcast, because I'm not a gamer and I love Jonathan Creek, so that was a big deal to me, that podcast.
Gav and I are both obsessed with Jonathan Creek, so we recorded that during lockdown. We did an episode a day to keep ourselves sane and have some semblance of a routine. And then we kind of did it a similar sort of format, just watching every installment of the Halloween series. And then this year we realised on the calendar there are two Friday the 13th, and they are exactly 91 days apart, which is 13 weeks. Annoyingly, there's only 12 films. But what we're doing is watching every single installment of the Friday the 13th series, and then on the second Friday the 13th, we're actually going to fly to America, and we're going to stay at Camp Crystal Lake overnight.
Oh my God, I'm so unbelievably jealous, but I'm really excited to kind of live it vicariously through you guys. This is super exciting.
It's good, like, horror fan bucket list stuff.
Big time. Holy shit. And so what does that mean, like, staying there? Is it, like, decked out for tourists and stuff? Is it, like, this kind of experience for horror fans?
Yeah, it's kind of like, so it is a working scout camp where they have kids come and stay for, during the summer. It's a summer camp, and they stay for weeks at a time, and they put on all these activities. They go out on Crystal Lake, canoeing and kayaking and stuff like that, and they stay under the stars, all this different stuff. And I think in recent years, they've kind of realized, actually, people want to stay there. Like, people who are fans of the movie, this is a huge thing to be able to do it. So they actually they started doing daytime tours, then they started doing evening tours, and then I think, like, just from speaking to those people, they were like, I think we could have people stay over. So they literally open up all the cabins to people come in. You can come and stay for the night. So we're going to be staying with other Friday the 13th fans in a cabin that was used in the movie as well. So like the next time we see the movie after staying there, we'll be able to go like, oh, we stayed there, which would be amazing.
That's fucking amazing.
And it raises the camp quite a lot of money. I think it's become a big source of income for them to like supplement what the work that they do with the young kids.
Oh my!
But we should launch a new podcast, horror tourism.
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean,
That's
horror
what we should
travel
do.
guide. Let's do it.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be so much fun. Are you guys gonna skinny dip, do drugs, have sex on a dodgy bunk bed? You know, all of those things. You gotta tick.
Well,
the bucket list.
We actually probably should say the name of the podcast.
Yes.
It's called How to Survive Friday the 13th.
Right.
When we watch every film, we basically talk about the films and rewatch them, but we're kind of watching them to learn what to do from the survivors and what not to do from the victims. And skinny dipping is a big no-no.
That's a big no-no, absolutely. What is your kind of relationship with these films generally up until this point? Like, are you fans of all of them? Do you have a particular favourite Friday the 13th?
Yeah, because I was a huge fan of these growing up, but because, you know, I think we're similar ages, and we've talked about this a little bit on the podcast, where it was like, we didn't have access to stuff, so you watched whatever you had access to. And a buddy of mine, Dave Powell, he had Friday the 13th Part 6. So we would just watch that constantly. And I think, like, for years and years and years, I hadn't seen loads of the other ones. And even, we talked about it a little bit in the podcast as well, is like, I think I hadn't even seen the first one. So in Scream, which I had seen before, by the time it comes to Scream, I'm like, when they say, oh yeah, Jason Voorhees is not the killer in the first one, I didn't even know that at the time. I was like, because I only had access to like a crumbly VHS tape of number 6. So, but yeah, but like over the years, I'd seen them all then, and it's definitely like of, you know, a lot of them, it's one of the most fun, but also the one I know the least as well. So I think this is kind of an opportunity for us to revisit these like properly, because we did Halloween. I think that's probably the series that between the two of us, knew the most.
Yeah. And I always feel like Halloween as a series kind of maybe has higher highs but much lower lows, I think. And whereas I feel like Friday the 13th, for better or worse, is pretty consistent, right? It's like 12 films where you know what you're getting, essentially.
I think as a franchise, it's kind of one of the reasons I wanted to do the Friday the 13th thing. Obviously, because of the calendar, it wouldn't make sense within the series. But it's a series I didn't really know. Like, I was very much a child of Freddy and Michael growing up. Those were the two big franchises I knew and watched a lot as a kid and as a teenager. I'd seen some of the Friday the 13th, but definitely not all of them. So for me, it was a good opportunity to watch them closely. Some for the first time. But I think like you just said, like unlike Halloween, it's a series that's never had higher aspirations. It's always known what it is from its inception. It is a Halloween horror film.
Yeah, completely. It doesn't take itself seriously, and it doesn't have that earnestness of the Halloween films, I think, does it? Like, it absolutely knows what it is.
Or the first Nightmare on Elm Street film as well. Like, it was made by a creator who very much did not like what came after it and was very vocal about that.
That is very exciting. So people can check out your podcast right now, right? Wherever they get their podcasts.
That's right. And it's also in lovely video form as well on youtube.com/RKG. You can see us in our lovely studio talking about it as well. Looking pretty hot, we are in it as well.
Delicious. Amazing. Well, there we go. I can't wait. Well, we're here to have a little chat about the Halloween Horror Nights, which I felt very, very privileged to be invited along to this year. You guys have done it a few times at this point, right? What's your kind of history with it? How many of these have you done at this point?
So I've done 5, but the first one I did in 1996.
Wow, holy shit.
Halloween Horror Nights 6, or VI.
Incredible. You must have been really young. Did you shit your pants?
No, I loved it. My mum, who, bless her, absolutely hates horror, we went on a family holiday there, and she saved up, and she saw that this was on, and I just checked before doing this recording. It only ran for 2 weeks. It ran for 15 nights back then. So that was 1996, and she was terrified. I remember at the end of the night her getting chased by a man wielding a chainsaw, but it turned out it was actually a leaf blower just tidying up the place. But I just loved the Crypt Keeper at the time, and he was the big mascot of Halloween Horror Nights 6. But then I went on a 22-year hiatus. And then me too scared. I actually remember, I've said this to Gav, I came out of a house and I was interviewed by local Florida TV.
No way.
So that footage might exist out there somewhere. So I'm putting this out on this podcast because if someone has access to that footage, it'll be someone listening to this podcast. I was a very large child. I should be easy to find. And then Gav and I have done it for 4 years together, I think.
Yeah.
So I've 2018, 2022, well, in the last 3 years, essentially.
Amazing. And how do you find it, Gav? Do you scare easily with these kinds of things?
Yeah, so like I'm incredibly jumpy. I love horror movies. I love being scared, but I'm incredibly jumpy. And it doesn't take much at all to make me jump. And Daniel is completely the opposite. So I think for the last couple of years, we've done a video on our channel, which is essentially like Scaredy Cat versus Serial Killer. Because Daniel does them all completely stony faced, whereas everybody will be able to hear me scream. So it's a good little balance for it. But yeah, I find them generally quite scary, even though I've done them 4 times now.
Yeah.
I do still, before the first one, get a tiny bit nervous and go, oh yeah, I've got to do all this, because you've just done it, Mike, for the first time, and I don't think you prepare yourself for like how the emotions of doing it, and like because you did 10 in one night too.
Oh my god, it's exhausting, right? Because of course we were very lucky in that we basically got to go from one to the other across that few hours, right? Which is, I guess, not the usual. Like, unless you have these express passes,
you'd have a different flow.
Yeah.
It's a different flow usually. You might want to take your time between a few different mazes and pause and get something to eat or whatever. We were just like bam, 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 bam every single maze, weren't we? And it's like you do feel like you've had a workout by the end of it because of just the adrenaline and the sheer kind of the constant scares and jump scares. Yeah,
absolutely. And they take you from, obviously, as you say, incredibly lucky to be able to do this, because some people do 3 or 4 houses maybe max a night, whereas like we're doing 10 back to back. At one point, I think in this run we did 3 back to back, and by the end of that, like, your adrenaline is just like, because you're screaming, you're laughing, and then you come out and then you're like, oh my god,
it's honestly insane. And for people, like, what can people expect, Daniel, from these sorts of things? Like, there might be people that have maybe done some of the smaller ones at places like Thorpe Park or whatever, but these ones are kind of known as being the biggest and best, right?
I think they do sell it as like the world's premier Halloween event now, and it runs for 2 months. It starts at the end of August and runs right through to the end of October now. It takes over all of Universal Studios. It's absolutely massive. So the event, as it stands today, there's 10 houses which you queue for like you would rides. So depending on what kind of ticket, you might be waiting for 2 hours, or you can get fast pass. And there's the 10 houses. These are like the premier attractions. And usually there's a split between IP houses, which is how they're referred to, which are usually tied in with very famous films. Like in the past, they've done The Shining, Exorcist. They've pretty much done all the big Halloween films apart from a couple.
Oh my God.
Horror films apart from the couple. They've never done Scream.
I bet The Shining was amazing, was it? I would love to have done that.
So we never did The Shining, unfortunately. Like, we did Poltergeist, we've done Halloween. They've done Halloween a bunch of times. We've done Halloween 4.
Of course.
What? Which was actually brilliant. But
great.
Obviously with those, there's probably a bunch of red tape involved. And then they also do original houses, which are really fun, completely original concept. And usually they have a lot of fun with those, and they're quite unusual and surprising.
Gav, did you have a favourite this year that kind of really sticks in your mind out of the ones you've done previously?
Yeah, so I really did. So like Daniel said, like, they do some based on movies, and I think one of the best that we ever did was the Poltergeist one, because the scale of that was just bonkers, and it was my first year doing it as well, so I had no idea what was coming, and that absolutely blew my mind. But the other one that we also did on our first year was this one called Slaughter Cinema, and it basically was just a way for them to chuck a load of ideas that maybe weren't big enough at the time to have their own house, and put them underneath this sort of like drive-in sort of grindhouse style presentation, where you go through and it'll be like, you know, 1 or 2 rooms to do with this idea, and like some of them will, like, if they're good enough, then get elevated to possibly get their own house. And this year actually was really exciting because they had Slaughter Cinema 2, which was like a sort of the sequel to that with a load more ideas. But this one had way more in it, whereas like Slaughter Cinema, there was a couple, but there was a few, you know, a few with like 2 or 3 rooms, whereas this one was just like scare straight after each other. So it's really interesting going through that one and going like, what's going to be possibly elevated? Because when we went, there was one about Yetis, because there's like a huge subculture of Yeti lovers who also love Halloween Horror Nights. And then that got made into, like last year, they did Yeti campgrounds. So it's really interesting to think this year, of all the ones in Slaughter Cinema 2, what ones we might see coming back.
Love that. And it is really clear.
Yeah, mummy strippers.
Oh my God. And I do love, like,
Unwrapped.
I love this idea that I think what I wasn't expecting, Dan, from these was that they did have, like, stories. They had concepts. They had like, the tour guide would kind of give us the story.
They're quite
You actually
involved.
get, like, characters and world building in these houses.
Yeah,
right?
I think for the people who want that stuff, it is there. And, you know, I think the Universal Monster House is a good example of that, because obviously they're doing the Blumhouse thing with the one-shot Universal Monsters, but this is a chance for them to really do their own kind of stories and build on it. This is almost like lore that exists within the theme parks only now. Mm-hmm. So in this year's one, Eternal Bloodlines, it was all kind of female-led Universal Monsters characters. So they're setting up this character of Saskia Van Helsing, which is Abraham's granddaughter or daughter. And she's going to be a character in the new theme park they're opening next year.
Yeah.
Which is going to have a Universal Monsters world. So they're kind of doing their own like mashup storytelling cinematic universe that exists only in the parks.
I love that. That's such a fun idea, and I'm so excited. It feels like such a no-brainer to make a theme park around the Universal Monsters as well. I'm so glad that they're finally doing that. There's going to be like a Wolfman coaster and all sorts.
Like me and Gav saying, also they spent all that money on that Dark Universe branding.
Yeah.
Gotta use it.
Exactly. Might as well use it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we should say as well, before we get into the houses specifically, the whole park is open during like the night as well. And it's such an atmosphere, isn't it? Because you've also got like the scare zones, and you've got actors walking around in costumes out in the main kind of walkways. Some of the roller coasters are open at night as well.
Yeah.
So it's a real like party vibe, isn't it? It's great.
Yeah, I always like, in the last couple of years, I've always... we did it last year, I did it this year, where like add on an extra night to the trip just to be able to go back into the park and do it. And like I went back in on the Sunday, so we did everything on the Friday night, but I went back in on the Sunday with a couple of mates and we just walked around. We did a couple of extra houses, but we were there just to walk around, have some drinks, because the whole it's basically one big goth party. And people just people go there to hang out, and people are also there to do the houses, obviously, and that's quite a rushed thing. But then there was lots of little bar areas, and we ended up just having a few drinks and just hanging out as if we were at a bar. It just happened to be there were people running around with chainsaws next to you as well.
I love it. Well, a few people have written in and sort of said, like, I've got my ticket for this.
Oh, cool.
Which ones should I prioritize? And, you know, if I don't have time to do them all, what are some of the best ones to go for? So I thought it might be nice for us to just maybe run through some of the key sort of mazes and haunted houses and maybe talk about some of our favourites. Okay. Let's start by just talking about those first 3, the kind of IP ones, the ones based on existing movies. The first one, Insidious, right? This kind of feels like it was made for this kind of experience, right? Like when you watch a movie like Insidious, it feels so perfectly suited to something like this. So it's like you're essentially going into the further, right? Daniel, what did you think of the Insidious house?
I think usually... there's usually a wide variety of tones in the houses and intensities. I definitely think this year this is very much their intense house. I think last year it was The Exorcist Believer. So beginning of Insidious, you go through the red door, and like you say, once you're in the further, is a great premise for just chucking a load of stuff at you. And obviously, what is it, like 5 of those films now? They've acquired so many different characters.
Yes.
that can have their own little set pieces. And I think there's this, obviously they kind of reuse ideas and tropes from houses from previous years. And one that we had in the Halloween house is, I think it's called a mannequin room. You go into a room and there's just loads of figures and you're not sure which are mannequins and which are real people. Now, I won't say what it is in Insidious, but in Halloween we went in a room and there's about 15 Michael Myers just staring at you.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
And as you walk through it, some turn their heads. So they reuse that idea, and I think I heard some I think we came out of the Insidious house and heard some guy who just been there first night. He wasn't like with the press tour that we were on, and he was like, "Can't believe they did 2 mannequin rooms. No way, no way."
How dare they? I walked into that mannequin room and I just immediately started going, nope, 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 nope.
It's such a great thing to be confronted by it. I think that's the thing that is worth conveying for people who've never been, is if you're a horror fan, and obviously if you've listened to this podcast you are, for me it's even though I'm not very jumpy, obviously I love horror, I love being in those situations and those environments. You know, your opportunity to essentially be in a horror film.
Yeah. Incredible. Gav, as somebody who's not great with jump scares, how did you find this particular one?
Yeah, this one was one of the most intense, and I think I was really, the thing that I really like about I think overall I probably prefer the original houses that the guys come up with, because they just are sort of free to come up with things. And I think because obviously with things like Insidious, Ghostbusters, Quiet Place, you've got to be, I'm sure there's lots of stuff they've got to run past the studios constantly. So you think then maybe the scares are sort of held back a little bit, but honestly this one really shit me up, because it was just, it just felt like it was a lot coming at you. Those films do really scare me as well.
Oh my god, yeah,
and I think
so scary.
As Daniel said, like last year, the Exorcist one, the same thing happened to me with this one, where I found myself in a room by myself with nobody else in the room, and I didn't know where the exit was. And the same thing happened to me last year with The Exorcist. I was in a room with 3 demons, and I didn't know where the exit was. And the exact same thing happened to me in this one, Insidious. I just didn't know how to get out, and I started really freaking out.
And you can't ask a demon.
And you can't ask a demon.
You can't ask a demon.
No.
These actors are amazing as well, because how fucking exhausting must it be for them as well? Like they're doing this thing over and over again to thousands of people every night.
It's a big operation.
Yeah.
Think of how many people are doing it. Hundreds, thousands.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. Is like, as Diana says, as well, it's like, even if you're not a jumpy person, but you just like horror, I think seeing the absolute scale and seeing like the level and the value of production gone into these houses, it is absolutely bonkers. Like last year for the Exorcist one, what they were doing for that was the movie hadn't come out yet, so it was like a living trailer. So you're essentially walking through the trailer, which is an incredible idea. And something like Insidious is very cool, like, as you say, like there's so many films you can kind of just do like a greatest hits of all the scares from those films, so you have all those characters that just appear in different films just coming at you one by one after in each room.
I love it.
It was a really good one.
And people can be a bit sniffy about the Insidious films. I've met a lot of horror fans that aren't that into them, and they think it gets a bit silly, particularly when you get into the further and up. But I kind of love all of that stuff, and the world building of it again feels like it's perfect for this. You've got the creepy bride woman with the veil and the red man, and like all those that fucking Tiptoe Through the Tulips song that plays on a loop as well. Like it's all nightmare fuel as far as I'm concerned. I love it. But then, like you say, like not all of them are just super intense, right? You get some that are a bit more light and fun. There was also the Ghostbusters Frozen Empire one, which had like, how did you guys find that one? That had a bit more of a sort of fun tone to it, didn't it?
That's very much on the opposite end of the scale for this year. I think that's the two extremes this year. Insidious on one end, Ghostbusters on the other. And I think that is similar to my point about being in a horror film. That is your opportunity to be in a Ghostbusters film and basically explore the sets. They do a really good job at replicating them. And Gav was saying is trying to put across the scale and production value, and this one has a great set piece where you go out and they've built like a scale replica of the firehouse. And in previous ones we've done, they've had like these big vistas of there was one based around a haunted fisherman's town in a previous year, a little bit like Carpenter's The Fog. Amazing. And you went out, you turned a corner, and they had this like forced perspective thing where you felt like you were in a seaside town at night and fog was coming in over the water, and you're like, how have they done that? And if you like movie making, you're obviously like, oh wow, this is cool. Incredible. And I think Ghostbusters does a lot of that. And also it's a bit of a greatest hits where you get to see all the Ghostbusters monsters from your youth.
So good. Yeah, you get to see a bit of everything, don't you? And yeah, it felt like one of the biggest scale ones that I went through as well, like big rooms and high ceilings and giant sets and things.
Yeah, and they really created some like scenes like the frozen like Century Club room from the movie where you're like, oh, this is pretty much like the scene from the movie.
Yeah.
Like pretty spot on. But yeah, and there's also loads of little Stay Puft Marshmallow Men everywhere.
Oh, adorable. And some delicious s'mores to eat as well, the Stay Puft
Yeah, that
s'mores.
was the big thing this year, wasn't it?
Oh,
we heard the queue to get a Stay Puft Marshmallow Man s'more, which is hard to say, was a queue longer than some of the haunted houses this year.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Also, FYI, the food and drink is just generally great, isn't it? It's all themed around the horror nights and stuff. Yeah, so good. What about A Quiet Place? Gav, what did you think of The Quiet Place one? Again, kind of, in a way, the film... A jumpy film like that kind of feels like it's made for an experience like this, right?
Yeah, this is the one that I was like probably like the least excited about, but most interested to see how they did it, because I mean the monsters in A Quiet Place are massive.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I thought it's going to be really hard for them to just replicate that idea of them coming after you. But I actually think the way that they did it, I did this one twice, so I went back on the Sunday, because I think like when I first did this one, I was maybe like a bit lukewarm on it. Went back again on the Sunday to do it again, and absolutely loved it. Because I really like. I haven't seen the third movie, but I really like the first two. And I think it's almost like a greatest hits of scenes. So you go down, you've got like, you walk past the bit with the nail sticking up, and you can also buy an eclair with a nail coming out of it, which we tried. And I think Daniel's like the spiciest eclair you've ever had.
It was unbelievable. Like, I'm good with spicy food. They just packed it with cinnamon cream, which I was not prepared for. And I was basically doing an enforced cinnamon challenge on camera.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I'm really glad. So basically, anytime that we go and do this, and like Daniel said, we've done it 4 times together now, is essentially we come back with footage of me screaming and shitting myself in extreme reactions, and Daniel looking like a serial killer. And I'm really glad that the one thing that I think you've had the most, we've got footage of it, and we'll be putting it out very, very soon, of Daniel eating an eclair and having the most extreme reaction of the night, I think.
Terrifying.
He was like,
oh my God.
This is a spicy
I
eclair.
googled it. Cinnamon is related to mace, which is in pepper spray. So, give me a break.
Well done, Universal.
You maced your own throat. I love it.
I thought the house, like, it really ramps things up as well, because a lot of the scares, they've got, they've kind of got the monsters sticking their head through a wall, or, and because you're like, well, you can't just have them constantly. But then towards the end, you actually get full-scale monsters like doing bits and trying to scare you, and I was like, okay, that was really good.
Incredible. That was the thing I was most impressed with, Dan, like, was the sort of the puppets and the way they brought those massive monsters to life.
Yeah, I think that's probably the flip side of maybe working with a big IP. Yeah, there maybe is loads of restrictions, but the stuff that you can go big on, they're like, yeah, we'll help you with that. And the design, similar last year we did The Last of Us.
Oh, man.
And
wow.
Neil Druckmann was heavily involved in that. And so you could really tell, like, some of the design on, like, the bloaters and some of the clickers was, like, extraordinary. Like, you're like, oh, that is makeup you could put on camera.
Holy shit. Incredible. So those are the sort of the main 3 sort of IP ones. And then there are, like you say, there are a whole bunch of other kind of original haunted houses. Let's just talk a little bit about some of our favourites. You mentioned the Universal one already. There was one that was called the Triplets of Terror, which I quite enjoyed as a slasher fan, because that was very much like the slasher house, wasn't it? You had a lot of people in kind of white masks with chainsaws and knives and that kind of thing. Gav, how did you find that one?
Yeah, that one was it's quite good. As in, that almost felt like another like greatest hits thing, because they had each triplet had their own type of thing. So every time you went in, it was like, oh, it was this triplets room or this triplets room. So I like that one. It did kind of like stand up, and I think every year there's always like a slasher house, and this was their big slasher one. But yeah, like out of all of them, I think the one that we really liked the most is like the next one on the list, which was Monstros, the Monsters of Latin America. This was unbelievable. So it was like basically loads of Latin American like folklore and like monsters from old stories chucked together into one room, and you had this like awesome guide called La Muerta, and he's like singing you around all these different monsters who will then just start jumping out at you. And the size on some of these monsters,
oh my god,
was absolutely bonkers. And
because Gav has a great fear of big things. Like, Gav is scared of Godzilla, not because it's a giant lizard, because it's big.
I'm a bit scared of Mount Rushmore. Like
those huge faces.
Yeah, like, because it shouldn't be that big. And the Monstros, the Monsters of Latin America one, they really play with that. There was a couple of giant monsters in it. Then there was just a giant head. And I think, like, at one point, I was looking at our footage, and at one point, like, it won't let me pass. But I thought it wouldn't let me pass. It wasn't doing anything. It was doing what it was meant to do. And I was like screaming back to Daniel going, it's not letting me pass. It won't let me through. Oh, Jesus Christ. It was so good.
I'm so glad you guys mentioned that one. I think that was my favourite as well. Just some incredible stuff. Dan, what did you think of that one?
Yeah, it's fantastic. I'm not going to have a go at pronouncing any names of the monsters. I don't need to get that wrong on a recording. But like, I think that this house actually existed the year before in LA, in the Hollywood one.
Oh, cool.
And I think this is like an embellished and an adapted version of it. But I think this is a great example. Like you say, the Triplets of Terror gets your slasher note. This was great for, like, if you like creature design.
Yeah. Exactly.
If you just want to see a bunch of cool looking monsters, this is the one to go to.
Yeah.
It almost reminded me, almost like, maybe it's the Mexican influence, but almost reminded me of like a Del Toro film.
Totally.
Taking a lot of cues from that kind of mythology.
Yeah, you're so right. And it's nice the way they kind of, again, feels very fitting for this podcast, but they kind of fit different kind of subgenres, you're right, of horror in that regard. Like I
think they're probably trying to accommodate for every kind of horror fan. Yeah. Like, we'll just hit all the notes. Like, you've got your really gory stuff, you've got your gothic stuff.
It's so true. And then you've got things like Goblin's Feast, which is almost like this kind of weird folk horror type thing. It's like, that was the one that was kind of set in, like, was it Ireland? There were like Irish pubs and things like that you're walking around, right? Which was amazing.
Yeah, because we had a couple of Irish people with us on our trip, and they're like, when you walked into one, I think they had like a like a sort of like little thing going. And when I came out, I was saying to them, I was like, "Oh, look, did you like the little Irish thing?" They thought I was taking the piss. They're going, "Oh yeah, little goblins, is it? That's what you think of Irish people?" I was like,
I think what we said was like, "Is that what it's like back home?"
Yeah,
that's what we said to say that.
Yeah, we were.
But Dad, they are our friends.
Yes, absolutely. Still our friends, so that's good.
There we go.
But the cool, we were talking about like the food and drinks and stuff earlier, and this is another cool one with Goblin's Feast, and the same with Monstros is when they're putting together the menus. Then they'll take inspirations from the houses to have things around. And any Irish people listening, the one for Goblin's Feast that you could buy was I don't know if you, Mike, are you aware of what a spice bag is?
No.
Mike, it'll change your life. I had one of these on a life-changing trip to Dublin last year or earlier this year.
An epiphany.
And essentially what it is you can have vegetarian ones or not, but especially chips cooked in spices with peppers and onions, sometimes chicken if you want chicken as well, and they basically they put it all into a bag, like mix all around, and you get all these like sometimes can be quite spicy things. And they had their own version of a spice bag that they were selling. They still sell in Universal now, called a Bloody Good Bag.
Oh my God!
It's available at the Simpsons area. So usually there's a taco truck that Bumblebee Man sells his taco out of, but it gets taken over for Halloween Horror Nights, and you can go buy, if you're an Irish person and you're going to be going to Universal Studios for Halloween Horror Nights, I cannot recommend it enough. The Bloody Good Bag. It is £12 for quite a small portion, but it was absolutely beautiful.
This is the only thing about these places is that you do need money to spend, don't you?
Yeah, you basically, but like I think like I've been a few times now, so I kind of unlock that part of my head where a $16 Bud Light is actually cheap.
Yeah.
Actually a bargain. So as long
once you've had a couple,
it's fine.
Very cheap. Yeah.
It's fine. Exactly. Just you gotta get through it, and it'll be fine.
Yeah.
It's a really, really fun one. That one. And then speaking of as well, you've got that kind of the Major Sweets Candy Factory as well, which again, like, delicious and terrifying, right? Like Dan, I just remember this as almost being like a kind of like Willy Wonka type thing from hell, essentially.
It's like Willy Wonka gone even more wrong. To be fair, you could do Willy Wonka.
Yeah, you could do Willy Wonka, yeah.
I think this is the first one we did this year.
It was, yeah.
Actually, I think this, yeah. It's just... to be fair, I actually don't remember this one very well because I was really busy filming Gavin.
Yeah.
So this was our first house, and we're like, I need this footage. So what I'm doing when we're going through this house is Gav's got a camera pointing at his face, and I've got like a really nice camera, good in low light, filming him from behind. So I'm like peeping Tomming him as we go through these houses. So the first one, because I'm fixated on keeping Gav in frame, a lot of this is just washing over me. And then I'm like, I look back at the footage and go, oh,
that's good. Yeah, for the first one, definitely, because we had like new gear and this was the first like run that we were doing it.
You were too excited about all your new equipment.
What's my ISO?
Yeah. But that's kind of what I was like with A Quiet Place as well, because like A Quiet Place, I was really focusing on filming, and to the point where I had to go back again and go, there was so much stuff that I missed. But I do remember the cool thing about Major Sweets' Candy Factory, and this is something that they've done a few times with Halloween Horror Nights, is they really play with smells now and again. So I think it was last year's the first time I can kind of remember them doing it. In the Last of Us house, they kind of pumped in a smell of like mushrooms.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So as you're going through one thing, you were like, fucking hell, you start smelling mushrooms.
Jesus.
And they really start mucking around with you in terms of like smell. And with this one, it was like walking past the M&M store where they just pumped in a load of like candy corn smells to it. And it's a very cool one. And it is kind of like one of the ones that you see a lot around the park because they're obviously selling a lot of the sweets and things like that.
Yes, and the kind of like story of it is that the deadly delicious treats turn kids into sugar fueled fiends, right? So you've got kind of a lot of like creepy deadly kids in this one as well, which is a big fear for a lot of people as well. So there's a lot of that going on in this one. And then finally, let me ask you guys about the museum, the Deadly Exhibit, which is like the kind of folklore museum run.
I think
right?
This is almost like a similar one. In sort of scale to like the Slaughter Cinema one, where they just chuck in a load of stuff at you that they've just gone, this will be a fun idea, or this will be a fun idea. So yeah, I remember it being decent, but it definitely was one I was like, I need to go back through and do that, because I think maybe out of all of them, it has like the least amount of a story, because it's just, hey, come into this museum and see this stuff.
Yes,
museum's a really good framework for that, isn't it? Like,
perfect.
Like basically that, and sort of like little portmanteau houses.
Yeah,
so you live and die on the bits.
Yeah, exactly. They're like the little anthology ones, aren't they? That's really interesting. Well, there you go. Well, if people were like, Dan, if somebody was like, I've not got money for an express pass, so I'm probably only going to get time to maybe do 3 to 4 mazes max. What would be the ones that you would sort of recommend people do?
If you're up for being scared, I'd say do Insidious. I'd do Universal Monsters, and I'd do Monstros. If you could squeeze one more for value for money, I'd do Slaughter Cinema.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think of intense ones, gothic ones, monster-led ones.
Get a bit of variation.
I guess if you could only do 3, I'd do Slaughter Cinema, because you'd probably have the greatest variety of stuff just coming at you.
Yeah, agreed. Gav, what about you?
Yeah, I think I would maybe try and, if they could, I think those ones definitely, if they, like Slaughter Cinema, Monstros, and Universal Monsters, definitely the best ones for me. But I think if you could as well, I would maybe have a look at A Quiet Place, just to see how they like really handle the scale of those giant aliens, basically.
Agreed. And I think also, Gav, like that thing like you said of enjoy the atmosphere of the park too, the food, the scare zones. You can go through the Blumhouse zone where you see Megan and like all these other characters, right? Like all of that experience is really fun as well.
Well, that's the thing. So like they take over the whole park. So each section where you sort of walk through usually is then turned into a thing called a scare zone. And some of them are just men with chainsaws running after you, but then some of them have like a stronger theme to them, like Torture Fair, which is kind of like a Renaissance like torture alley. So you have all people being like ripped apart and things, but then that's the cool thing. I mean, like there's loads of people listening to this podcast, I'm sure, mad into Blumhouse movies, and they basically have like a greatest hits of some of Blumhouse's films standing there and coming after you. So there's like a Megan dance-off thing.
So
you have you can hear, the cool thing is you can hear the thing from Black Phone. Just you can hear the phone from that just constantly ringing.
Yeah.
I actually recommended it to my buddy Barry last year. Him and his girlfriend were going to be in Universal at the time, and I said, and he's look, she's really jumpy. I don't know if she's going to enjoy the houses. If we went, would it just be a lot? I was like, honestly, because they're both boozers. I was like, you'll have a really good time not going to any houses.
Totally.
And just seeing how they transform that park into, like I said, a giant goth party where you can just walk around, meet other people. And like a really cool thing that's started happening in the last couple of years that we only became aware of is friendship bracelets. So friendship bracelets are a huge thing now. So like last year, we were on a bus on our way in, and there was a girl there with a huge bag. Like I think since Taylor Swift has brought friendship bracelets back, any kind of like big events like this now sometimes has a little friendship bracelet sort of community go into it. So there's people swapping friendship bracelets, and you know, probably your tour guide probably had a bunch on them as well, because people are taking them up to tour guides and things like that. But like, honestly, it's the coolest place to just go hang out and have a beer.
It really is. And you can even go on some of the rides, right? Dan, what's that roller coaster that plays music while you go around it?
I can never remember the name of it. It's called like Ride Rocket. There's a rip in it.
Yeah. That is a really fun. Absolutely threw me around. Like I think I did something to my neck on that ride, but it was worth it. It was really
as well.
Fun. Yeah.
There's also, so if people don't know this roller coaster, it's kind of like a music themed roller coaster, and as you're about to set off, you can select a song to listen to on the roller coaster. So they've got like Aerosmith and Beastie Boys and lots of stuff, different genres. But around Halloween, I can't remember if you type in 666 and hold it, you get some secret Halloween songs.
So good. Yeah.
So you get Chucky as a DJ, and I think he plays a song for you.
That's right. Incredible. And it's quite a hardcore roller coaster. Like it fires you up vertically, and then there's like zillions of loops and all of that kind of stuff. Like it's a really fun one, and to ride at night in that atmosphere, right? Really
to ride at night, because it takes you up literally over the parks. Then you can see the whole thing at night. It's also, I've been on it a few times. I went on it a couple of Sundays ago in the night. Lots of young people end up going on, lots of teenagers and stuff. So it's the most like Adventureland I ever feel like going on when I'm in these parks, because it just feels like people have gone there just to hang out and kiss. So if you like doing that, do that too.
Oh, incredible. Well, there we go. Hopefully that's kind of whet people's appetite for it a little bit, because it's so much fun, and kind of I can see why you guys would want to keep going back every year, because it is just like what a giant fun playground of a place to go and hang out, right, as well.
It's horror Glastonbury.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, absolutely incredible.
I think we've said it before. We've been like, if you're a horror fan, this is probably the best thing you can spend your money on.
Go be with your people.
Yeah, I know. And as ever with all horror crowds, everyone's so nice, right? Everyone is just like
the nicest.
Very chill and welcoming, and everyone's just having the best time. So good.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. Well, guys, thank you so much. What a pleasure it's been to have you both on the podcast to discuss this. And just remind people one more time where they can find more of your stuff and where they can check out your new Friday the 13th podcast as well.
Well, they can, anywhere you get your podcast, you can listen to How to Survive Friday the 13th, or you can go to youtube.com/RKG and watch the video forms there. We also do a lot of non-horror things. So if you're into the From Software games like Dark Souls, Elden Ring, we've got a huge Elden Ring playthrough going on at the minute, which has taken over our lives in the most beautiful way. So if you could watch that as well, it would be really good.
Incredible. Guys, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
And there we go, that's it for our Halloween Horror Night special. And I know a few of you guys have commented and written to me saying that you have got your tickets and you're planning on going, so I really hope that conversation helped you decide maybe what you want to check out and what you want to do on your night there. But it is so much fun. I really hope I get to go again next year, because it is quite the experience, especially if you're a horror fan or if you're a theme park fan or any of the above. It's really very much the Venn diagram of my personality, so I was very, very happy to be there. And a big thank you one more time to Gav Murphy and Daniel Krupa. And you know, if you like listening to them on this podcast, I'm sure most of you probably are already aware of them both and what they do, but as they mentioned, they do have a Halloween podcast where they discussed and reviewed every film in the Halloween franchise, and they are also now doing their How to Survive a Friday the 13th podcast, both of which are brilliant, so check them out wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week to resume our Nature Bites Back series, and I'll be discussing Cujo and alligator with Michael Blythe. Join us next week for all of this and more on the evolution of horror.